In Hollywood, many stars were once praised as symbols of justice and compassion. They played heroes who stood up for the weak, called for equality, and were celebrated as role models for society. The public believed that beyond the screen, they too carried those noble ideals. But when the lights went out, another truth emerged. Some despised black people so much they refused to even share the same room. Some actresses carried a burning hatred toward Asians, and there were actors who constantly spat insults at the Jewish community. And now let's take a look at 10 old Hollywood stars who were shockingly racist. Let's begin with the first name, Johnny Carson. 1. Johnny Carson. The Tonight Show was almost closed off to black artists. The Tonight Show under Johnny Carson was once seen as the golden launchpad, where anyone who sat in the guest chair could change their life overnight. But when looking back at the guest list during the 3 decades he ruled the show, a chilling truth emerges: the number of black artists invited by Carson was so few they could be counted on one hand. 2. Sammy Davis Jr. The star of the Rat Pack was one of the very few to appear regularly. Yet observers at the time noted that Davis Jr. was more like a good luck charm, a shield Carson used to prove to the public he wasn't prejudiced. The televised hugs and kisses between the two were staged as historic moments. While behind the scenes, Davis Jr. was called by many friends in the industry the black cover-up for a program that was otherwise almost entirely white. Richard Pryor, the greatest black comedian of the 1970s, was invited by Carson only on rare occasions. Instead of letting Pryor unleash the sharp, biting material about racism that had made his name, The Tonight Show's team trimmed, censored, and restricted him, turning him into a watered-down version designed to soothe white audiences. Eddie Murphy also appeared at the end of the 1980s. But as papers like the Los Angeles Times recorded, that was only when Carson needed to refresh his image after mounting criticism that his show no longer reflected a changing society. Beyond those 3 faces, the list of black artists who ever sat across from Carson was nearly empty. Black jazz and R&B singers like Nina Simone, Marvin Gaye, and Aretha Franklin had repeatedly expressed their wish to be invited, but the door of The Tonight Show remained firmly shut. An internal NBC document cited by Variety revealed that Carson personally crossed Nina Simone's name off the guest list in 1965, scribbling only a brief note, too political. It was a stark reflection of how Carson curated a screen that was clean, whitewashed, and free of anything that might remind viewers of racial injustice. The rare moments when black artists were allowed on were little more than tactics for Carson to win public trust. A critic from the New York Times once wrote, "Every time Carson shook hands with a black performer on air, audiences sighed in relief, as if America had become fair. But the truth was, he welcomed them as strangers, then locked the door behind them." The cruelest part was that Carson's guest chair could decide the fate of an entire career. Countless white artists, from Steve Martin to Joan Rivers, walked out of The Tonight Show and into legend. Meanwhile, a whole generation of black talent was left on the sidelines, erased simply because Carson wanted to preserve a safe space for his conservative white viewers. Looking back, we see a chilling paradox. The man hailed as America's best friend was, at the same time, the gatekeeper who shut diversity out. Johnny Carson was not only the king of late night, he was the one who held the power to raise a star to glory, or cast them forever into the shadows. And he used that power to enforce a Hollywood that was brutally segregated. One guest chair could change a life yet. In Johnny Carson's hands, it became a locked door for people of color. And once the late-night king revealed that truth, the public was even more stunned when they turned to John Wayne, a man who not only discriminated in silence, but openly glorified white supremacy as if it were America's ultimate truth. 2. John Wayne. Believing white supremacy was the only truth. Galloping horses across the desert, the stern commander in war films, or the upright man who always defended justice on screen. He was nicknamed the Duke, placed by Time magazine among the 100 most influential cultural icons of the 20th century. Yet behind the wide-brimmed hat and steel gaze, Wayne concealed an extreme conviction he saw white supremacy not merely as an opinion, but as truth itself. In 1971, during a marathon interview with Playboy, Wayne bluntly declared, "I believe in white superiority until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." Those words were printed verbatim across millions of copies broadcast on television, leaving the public stunned. There was no slip of the tongue or ambiguity. It was a manifesto delivered with confidence, as if he were acting out another role, only this time the script was a prejudice ingrained in his blood. For decades, Wayne tied himself to films that depicted Native Americans as savages, Mexicans as thieves, and nearly erased black people from the screen altogether. This was no accident. In many off-record conversations documented by journalists like Maurice Zolotov, Wayne revealed his blatant disdain for these communities. He argued that Hollywood doesn't need too many strange faces, and that audiences came to theaters to see the stories of white people. That belief became a formula repeated in dozens of his so-called classics. Wayne did not stop at skin color. He went further, justifying the blood-soaked acts of history. When asked about white settlers taking land from Native Americans, he coldly replied, "It was just survival. The natives were selfish for keeping it all to themselves." Those words, printed boldly in Playboy, later led historians like Gary Wills to call Wayne the man who redefined American history in its most brutal form. In the same interview, Wayne openly opposed women's liberation movements and mocked films with gay characters. He dismissed them as sick lifestyles and insisted he didn't want such figures on Hollywood screens. For the LGBTQ+ community, hearing this from a megastar of Wayne's stature was nothing less than a public verdict reinforcing prejudices that had lingered for decades. What made it more chilling was that Wayne did not only speak, he acted. In 1960, when director Stanley Kramer considered inviting Paul Robeson, a famous black performer and civil rights activist, to join a project, Wayne reportedly lobbied behind the scenes to block it. The reason later revealed in an interview was that Wayne did not want the leftists and those radical blacks to gain footing in Hollywood. As a result, Robeson was cast aside. It was only one example among many showing Wayne's willingness to use his power to stifle change. Even as the civil rights movement erupted across America in the 1960s, Wayne's image continued to dominate the big screen. He still won the Oscar for True Grit. In 1969, still had statues erected in his honor, still hailed as America's hero. Until the end of his life in 1979, he never retracted his racist or homophobic words. On the contrary, Wayne regularly appeared at conservative political events, openly opposing every push for equality reform. The bitter irony is that while thousands of people of color shed blood for equal rights, his name was engraved on the International Airport of Orange County. Wayne became undeniable proof of a paradox. Hollywood was willing to paint a man who openly worshipped white supremacy as a national hero, regardless of everything he said and did. But Wayne was only the beginning, for right after him, another face once hailed as the most gentlemanly star of the silver screen would reveal a darker side that shook Hollywood to its core: Clark Gable. 3. Clark Gable, the Gone with the Wind gentleman addicted to dropping the N-word. Clark Gable had long been seen as the embodiment of elegance during Hollywood's golden age. His image in a dark suit with sleek hair and a proud demeanor made millions of viewers crown him the king of the silver screen. Yet behind that polished exterior lay a darker truth that was hard to accept. Gable had the habit of using the N-word as part of his everyday language. The N-word is one of the most degrading terms in American history toward black people. It was not merely a vulgar insult, but a symbol of an entire system of oppression tied to slavery and racial segregation. That a star of Gable's stature would use the word so casually not only reflected his personal beliefs, but also exposed the cruelty Hollywood was willing to overlook at the time. Actress Hattie McDaniel, who made history as the first black performer to win an Oscar for her role as the Mammy in Gone with the Wind, was living proof of Gable's contradictions. In public, he posed as her defender, objecting when she was barred from attending the ceremony at the Ambassador Theater and even praising her talent. But in private conversations, McDaniel admitted that Gable repeatedly called her the N-word, doing so naturally and indifferently, as if it were the most normal thing. It was not only McDaniel who faced his disdain. Lesser-known memoirs from crew members revealed that Gable often mocked the black extras on set. He would imitate their voices and gestures, turning them into the butt of jokes. During one shoot in Culver City in 1939, he uttered a contemptuous remark so sharp that the entire room fell silent. Yet no one dared challenge the most powerful star in Hollywood at that time. The Los Angeles Times of that era also recorded this paradox. In official events, Gable was described as a fair-minded man, even opposing segregated bathrooms on set. Yet at private Beverly Hills parties, he would tell jokes ridiculing black people, sending tables into roaring laughter. This was no longer just a private quirk, but an open form of entertainment built on the humiliation of an entire community. Why did Gable cling so tightly to the N-word? Film scholars, such as Donald Bogle, argued that his upbringing in the American Midwest, where the term was used as common speech, had left a deep imprint. But in Hollywood, where he had every chance to change, Gable chose to preserve the habit, even turning it into his signature in private conversations. The result was that the image of the refined gentleman adored by audiences proved to be nothing more than a thin shell. Beneath it was a two-faced man willing to wield venomous words to enforce the color line. And that made the shock even greater. One of Hollywood's brightest stars had in fact been steeped in language and behavior that reeked of racism. And while Gable could still mask the truth behind charm and charisma, another man, James Stewart, would reveal his true self right on set, where his cruel remarks left entire crews shuddering. 4. James Stewart refusing to act with black people at the height of the civil rights era. There is nothing more cruel than the silence of a man the whole society sees as a role model. That line fits James Stewart perfectly, the star once hailed as America's good man. On screen, he was the gentle soul in It's a Wonderful Life, the brave citizen in Mr. Smith. Goes to Washington, the very face of kindness and fairness. But off-screen, the stories that slowly surfaced turned that image into a painful betrayal. During the filming of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance in 1962, black actor Woody Strode vividly remembered the moment Stewart hurled demeaning words that stunned the entire set. John Ford, the notoriously tough director, had to intervene immediately to stop the confrontation from exploding in front of everyone. Strode later told Ebony magazine that he had never felt so humiliated and that the sting of that insult haunted him for years. But the shock did not end there. In the early 1970s by then, already a Hollywood monument with his own sitcom on American television, Stewart once again revealed his stance. A young black actor had been cast as an important advisor in the show. Just a few episodes later, viewers noticed the character had vanished completely, as if he had never existed. People on the production revealed that Stewart had vehemently opposed the role, insisting he would not accept a black man lecturing his character in front of millions of viewers. It was not just a personal preference, but a public act of erasing opportunity at a time when Hollywood was only just beginning to crack its door open to diversity. Journalists at the New York Times documented the growing tension around Stewart. He grew increasingly close to J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, infamous for his conservative views and his hostility toward both the civil rights movement and organizations fighting for equality. To Hoover, communist was simply another word for anyone who dared speak up for Black Americans. Stewart, with his status as America's hero, became a silent but highly effective ally in that campaign. What wounded the public most was the hypocrisy. On screen, James Stewart played the man who would step forward to defend the weak. In real life, he used every means at his disposal to suppress his black colleagues. He did not merely stay out of the civil rights movement. He actively turned his back, leveraging his reputation and influence to halt integration right on his own stage. The image of the kind-hearted father that America once adored shattered. Stewart became proof of a bitter truth. Even the brightest faces in Hollywood could conceal the darkest shadows. And when that mask fell away, the public realized that the hero on screen was sometimes nothing more than a role. And Stewart was not alone. Because the next name on the list, another so-called hero of the silver screen, Gary Cooper, would expose prejudices so venomous they turned his image of integrity into one colossal lie. 5. Gary Cooper, the screen hero, consumed by an obsession with anti-Semitism. Gary Cooper was once hailed as America's hero. With his towering frame, quiet eyes, and unadorned acting style, he became a symbol in films like High Noon and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. Audiences saw in him a kind of incorruptible integrity, a straightness that seemed unshakable. Yet behind that polished image lay a much darker fixation. Cooper carried within him a deep hostility toward the Jewish community, and he never hid it in private conversations. According to colleagues at parties in Beverly Hills, Cooper would lower his voice and spit out venomous remarks, insisting that Hollywood is being manipulated by Jews. He saw them as puppet masters, pulling strings behind the great studios, and he believed that unless they were cleaned out, the industry would lose its American identity. Jewish screenwriters like Ben Hecht and Clifford Odets later admitted in their memoirs that the atmosphere of the 1940s and 1950s was thick with suspicion. Comments like Cooper's only amplified that fear, turning studio corridors into spaces filled with wary glances and whispered sabotage. Why would a supposed screen hero be so obsessed with expelling Jews? Much of it came from his Montana upbringing, a place steeped in conservative ideology. When he arrived in Hollywood, he carried those prejudices with him. Instead of changing, he reinforced them with the power his fame gave him. To Cooper, the rise of Jewish filmmakers threatened the natural order he believed America was destined to uphold. That distorted conviction made him a vessel of stereotype and fear, all under the guise of defending American values. It did not stop at words. Cooper played a direct part in repression. When HUAC began its hearings against alleged communists in Hollywood, he volunteered to testify. The sight of Cooper, a national hero, was broadcast across America as proof that the industry needed cleansing. Though he never accused anyone outright, his mere presence lent legitimacy to a machine of persecution that blacklisted hundreds of writers, actors, and directors, most of them Jewish or supporters of civil rights, forcing many to flee the country to survive. The irony is that while he scorned an entire community for being different, his own private life carried secrets that American society of the time considered taboo. Rumors from scandal sheets like Confidential to Memoirs by Friends in the Business spoke of an intimate bond between Cooper and fellow actor Randolph Scott. The two were said to have shared a Malibu beach house, and photographs of their closeness once sent Paramount scrambling to bury the evidence. A man who had known the fear of living outside accepted norms might have been expected to sympathize with those marginalized. But instead of understanding, Cooper aligned himself with the far right, turning his own insecurity into a weapon against Jews and against any effort toward integration. That paradox transformed Gary Cooper's legacy into one of Hollywood's bitterest tragedies. On screen, he saved entire towns with quiet courage. Off-screen, he spread fear to hundreds of people simply because they came from different backgrounds or held different beliefs. Critic Richard Schickel once remarked, "Cooper did not just play integrity. He used that role to mask some of the harshest prejudices. The glow of cinema could not erase the shadows." Cooper became living proof of how Hollywood built monuments while simultaneously tolerating men who used their power to oppress and exclude. And right after him, another star, who had also entered the pantheon of icons, revealed a contempt just as venomous. That figure was Vivien Leigh, a woman who off-screen carried herself with the conviction that black people were beneath her to the core. 6. Vivien Leigh Scarlett O'Hara, in real life, also despised black people. On December 15, 1939, Gone with the Wind premiered in grand fashion in Atlanta, Georgia. The event was broadcast nationwide with thousands lining up just to catch a glimpse of the cast. On screen, Vivien Leigh as Scarlett O'Hara dazzled the world with her haughty beauty and proud gaze. But behind the applause, a shocking truth slowly emerged. In real life, Leigh carried an ingrained contempt for black people, and it was something that went far beyond the confines of the script. During filming in Atlanta, many behind-the-scenes witnesses recalled that Leigh frequently made disparaging remarks about black actors. She regarded them as nothing more than background to the story, fit only to don servant costumes and remain in the frame's shadows. According to a memoir by a crew member, Leigh once refused to step into the makeup room after seeing black extras inside, demanding that her assistant clean the space before she entered. That act was not merely diva-like arrogance, but a clear expression of a deep-rooted racial prejudice. When the film later came under heavy criticism after World War II, Gone with the Wind was denounced as a lavish painting that glorified slavery. Hattie McDaniel, the first black actress ever to win an Oscar for her role as Mammy, could not escape the controversy with her character condemned as a servile stereotype. Major journalists like Richard Schickel of Life magazine and Bosley Crowther of the New York Times demanded that the leading cast members speak out in light of the rising civil rights movement. Clark Gable at least showed disapproval toward segregated restrooms, but Vivien Leigh chose absolute silence. No explanation, no apology, only a cold indifference, as though the cries outside had nothing to do with her. That silence spoke louder than any words. A shocking anecdote recorded in the diary of a British reporter recounted that during a private screening in London in 1940, Leigh allegedly laughed at the scene where a black servant knelt to pick up Scarlett's gown, then turned and remarked with scorn that they only look natural when in that position. Those words, though, whispered, clung to her like a stain that could never be erased. Her legendary beauty and striking green eyes enchanted audiences so much that they were willing to overlook everything else. But that aura only concealed an uncomfortable truth. Vivien Leigh did not just play Scarlett O'Hara, she lived as Scarlett in real life, carrying within her the prejudices of the Old South, a South built on the pain and subjugation of black people. That legacy carved a deep fracture in the image of Hollywood's golden age. Lee became proof that even the so-called goddesses of the silver screen could be enablers of injustice. And while Lee kept her silence, Katharine Hepburn chose instead to express open hostility, turning her prejudice into bitter declarations before a world engulfed in war. 7. Katharine Hepburn, feminist icon, but consumed by hatred of the Japanese. Katharine Hepburn was often celebrated as a trailblazing face for women in Hollywood. She wore trousers when America was still scandalized by such an image. She played women who dared to love, dared to live, dared to defy convention. But behind the halo of the feminist icon, another shadow emerged. One of deep-seated hatred for the Japanese that had taken root in her psyche after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. That morning, the news of Japan's assault on the American naval base in Hawaii shocked the world. More than 2,400 soldiers and civilians were killed, dozens of warships destroyed. Americans drowned in anger, and Hepburn was no exception. But instead of sharing in the collective grief, she turned it into a public vow. In a conversation with a reporter at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Hepburn was quoted declaring, "I cannot and will never work with anyone of Japanese blood." The statement appeared in newspapers across the country, making her one of the loudest voices in the swelling anti-Japanese wave. Her hatred was not confined to words. According to records from the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, Hepburn once rejected a Broadway contract because several Japanese-American actors had been cast in the supporting roles, even though they were born in California and had no ties to the military. She branded them potential threat spies in the guise of artists. That mindset quickly spread onto film sets. Japanese characters in scripts were often pushed into roles as spies, villains, or silent shadows. One screenwriter bitterly recalled, "The pressure from Hepburn buried an entire community of artists under humiliating roles." The painful irony was that Hepburn was praised worldwide as a symbol of freedom and gender equality, while at the same time helping to erect a brutal wall of prejudice. She could wear trousers and shatter gender stereotypes, yet she slammed the door shut on Japanese performers purely out of personal hatred. Life magazine once noted, "Freedom in Hepburn's eyes had boundaries, and it ended the moment she saw a Japanese name on the cast list." In later years, when the civil rights movement surged, many stars sought reconciliation, but Hepburn remained silent. That silence confirmed that her hostility was not a fleeting wartime impulse, but a scar that ran through her entire career. Behind the glow of the independent goddess was an actress who let her hatred become a tool to perpetuate prejudice. And just as the public had not yet fully reckoned with that contradiction, Hollywood faced another case of equally jarring duplicity. Marlon Brando, the man who once stood boldly against injustice at the Oscars in private, spread prejudices that were just as poisonous. 8. Marlon Brando, the two-faced genius who championed civil rights in public but spread prejudice in private. The moment Marlon Brando refused to accept the Oscar in 1973 became an explosion that shook Hollywood. Instead of walking on stage to receive the award for The Godfather, he sent actress Sachin Littlefeather to deliver a speech condemning Hollywood's distortion of Native American portrayals. The broadcast carried that scene to millions of American homes, and Brando was instantly hailed as a warrior of justice, an artist bold enough to challenge the entire system. But behind the stage lights, the truth of his private life left many repulsed. Rita Moreno Brando's longtime lover revealed that at private parties in his Mulholland estate, he often mocked the voices of black people, and even mimicked their daily habits to amuse friends. According to Moreno, one night, in a drunken haze, Brando said, "I could never trust a black person in my own house." These words were not one-off slips. They were repeated many times, a habit that seeped into the way he saw the world. Even worse, close friends later confirmed that Brando frequently made venomous remarks about Asians and Latinos at dinner tables. A journalist from the New York Post once recorded in his notes that Brando had two faces, publicly advocating equality, while privately sprinkling prejudice into conversations as if it were just seasoning for a story. The contradiction was stark when set beside his public activism. Brando had marched with Martin Luther King Jr., even appeared in Washington, D.C. during the 1963 March for Jobs and Freedom. He embodied the image of the artist standing alongside the civil rights movement. Yet at the same time, many black colleagues revealed that Brando never welcomed them into his personal circle, and even avoided working closely with them in long-term film projects. This paradox forced the Western press to question his legacy. The Guardian once branded him a monument of contradiction, a man who made history and left behind stains in the same breath. The result was a divided public. Some still saw him as courageous, while others believed Brando only borrowed the language of justice to glorify himself, using social movements as tools to sculpt his great rebel image. Brando's legacy thus became a chaotic canvas. His cinematic talent is undeniable, but every time his name is spoken, it is tinged with the memory of a two-faced genius, a man who shook Hollywood to its core while casually spreading poisonous prejudice in his private life. And while Brando wore justice as a mask, another voice, Bing Crosby, used his soothing songs to cover the ugly jokes of racism within his very own home. 9. Bing Crosby, the Christmas voice that planted prejudice in his own family. Bing Crosby's voice once filled every radio station during the holidays. His song White Christmas became the best-selling record of century, embraced across America as the sound of reunion and joy. But inside his home in Holmby Hills, surrounded by rose gardens and white fences, the air was thick with tension because Crosby had turned his prejudice into entertainment at the dinner table. Gary Crosby, his eldest son, wrote in his memoir that family dinners often began with a performance that chilled the children to the bone. The man millions adored as a living Santa Claus would mimic the voices of black people as a comedy routine, laughing loudly before switching to imitations of Latino speech. To spice it up, he would add jokes ridiculing Jews, ending with the phrase, "just kidding." For Crosby, racism was not taboo. It was amusement repeated again and again like a sick refrain. The truth was also evident outside the home. In California, Crosby was a longtime member of elite golf clubs and restaurants where the rules discreetly stated no blacks and no Jews allowed. Many Hollywood stars of his era chose to protest, but Crosby stayed silent, raising his glass as though exclusion was his class privilege. A Los Angeles Times report in the late 1950s even recalled how he refused to take part in a charity concert simply because the organizers included too many immigrants. What shocked most was how Crosby poured his prejudice into his family life. He knew that publicly mocking blacks or Jews might cause backlash, so he shifted that power inward, turning it into a tool for disciplining his children. Gary recalled senseless beatings, shouting fits that drew blood, all rooted in his father's obsession with proving himself above others. That need to stand over people turned Crosby from a beloved crooner into a tyrant at home. Gary wrote bitterly, "I grew up with the shameful belief that if you were of a different skin or background, my father would crush you. The public saw a gentle man in a priest's cassock in Going My Way, a symbol of fatherly warmth every time his voice came through the radio. But behind the walls of the Crosby home, the truth was the opposite. It was a place where children trembled before cruel jokes and sudden rages. The image of the voice of Christmas became a cruel paradox, warmth on the outside and endless winter of prejudice on the inside." That duplicity left a scar on public memory. Crosby did not just plant pain in his own family. He sowed prejudice into the next generation, turning racism into a twisted tradition disguised within melodies of joy. If Crosby used music to cover his darkness, Charlie Chaplin used laughter itself to conceal prejudices few imagined. 10. Charlie Chaplin, the champion of the poor who spat racist insults. Charlie Chaplin was once hailed as the voice of the downtrodden. His tramp character made the world weep for the small lives crushed under the weight of society. But the shocking truth is that in real life, Chaplin used his fame and power to trample others from crew members behind the camera to the very women who shared his life. He wed Mildred Harris when she was just 16, and he was 29, then abandoned her when she became pregnant. He married Lita Gray at 16 when he was 35, ending in a scandalous divorce, filled with accusations of control imprisonment and years of verbal abuse. His relationship with Paulette Goddard was less stormy, but marked by inequality with her forever cast as Chaplin's shadow. Even with Una O'Neill, his final wife, he shocked the world by marrying her at 18 when he was 54. These were not simply mismatched romances, but a clear pattern. Chaplin repeatedly chose women far too young so he could dominate and impose his will. While audiences shed tears for the tramp crushed by society, few knew that outside the screen, Chaplin often recreated that same cruelty only with himself as the oppressor. A man celebrated as humanitarian turned his own life into a stage of power where women and the powerless were nothing but props. That truth warped Chaplin's legacy. He was not only a cinematic genius, but also a symbol of hypocrisy that Hollywood indulged. And when Chaplin used laughter to mask his darkness, Walt Disney left behind another chapter, no less chilling, with accusations tying him to fascist sympathies and anti-Semitic ideology. 11. Walt Disney, the father of magic, accused of ties to fascism and anti-Semitism. Mention Walt Disney, and most people instantly think of Mickey Mouse Snow White or dazzling theme parks lit up with fireworks. He was called the father of childhood, the man who brought magic to the entire world. But when one looks more closely at his real life, it becomes clear that this magic was built on foundations far less pure, marked by prejudice, exclusion, and connections that still send chills. Animator Art Babbitt, once a close associate, openly stated that Disney attended meetings of the German-American Bund, a pro-Nazi organization in the United States. This was more than rumor. Other witnesses also claimed they saw Disney comfortably shaking hands and chatting with men who openly admired Hitler. Most troubling of all, Disney never publicly denied or clarified these ties, letting the suspicion cling to his name. The most shocking incident came in 1938, only weeks after Kristallnacht, when thousands of Jews were arrested and synagogues set ablaze. Disney calmly opened his Burbank studio doors to welcome Leni Riefenstahl, the woman known as Hitler's propaganda machine. European media immediately erupted in condemnation, calling it a trampling on human suffering. For many Jewish filmmakers, the act signaled that Disney valued power and profit over justice. The prejudice was also woven into the very products that millions of children worldwide grew up with. In Dumbo, 1941, a flock of crows with exaggerated, foolish voices were modeled as caricatures of black people, silly, unserious, laughable. Song of the South, 1946, went even further, painting slavery as a dreamy old South where enslaved blacks happily sang under the watch of white masters. Defenders called it a mistake of time, but it was a deliberate choice, turning stereotypes into entertainment and selling them back to audiences through tickets and merchandise. Behind the scenes, colleagues recounted that Disney often made jabs about Jews, particularly New York-based artists. Mexican-born animator Bill Melendez said Disney showed open disdain for co-workers who were not white. In California, he joined elite clubs notorious for their unspoken rule: no blacks, no Jews. Rather than protest, Disney stayed treating exclusion as a privilege of his class. The most frightening aspect was his ability to package all of these prejudices into cultural products for children, the most impressionable audience with the least defense. The sweet characters in his films were not just fairy tales, but vessels carrying distorted models of race and class. Cultural researchers have noted, Disney did not just sell dreams, he sold a world where discrimination was cleverly wrapped in the cloak of magic. And yet, to this day, the Disney monument still stands, and people still call him the father of childhood joy. That reality leaves many uneasy. How could a symbol of happiness also be a man who tolerated and nourished prejudice? The magic he spread was never entirely pure, for beneath it lay a darkness strong enough to stain the childhood memories of generations. Looking back at these stories, we see that Hollywood was never only light and wonder. It has always harbored shadows too bitter to ignore. Legends once hailed as heroes often left behind stains that can never be erased. And what about you? Which star on this list shocked you the most? Are there other names you want me to uncover in future videos? Share your thoughts in the comments below so we can discuss them together. Do not forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video so you will not miss any of the explosive secrets hidden behind Hollywood's glittering curtain. See you in the next episode.